Hello, and thank you for listening to the History of WWII Podcast, episode 407, interview with Chloe Melas about her grandfather's book, Luck of the Draw. Originally published more than 20 years ago, Frank Murphy's book about his time with the 100th Bomb Group and then as a POW until the end of the war, Chloe and her mother have had the book republished, as Frank Murphy will be in the upcoming Tom Hanks Steven Spielberg series, Masters of the Air, to be released sometime later this year. Chloe, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm the one who's excited. Let's not get into a contest about who's more excited, but I think we all know who would win. If I remember, before we jump into this, if I remember correctly in my research, you have family and or roots in Atlanta, yes?
Yes, I do. So I was born in Atlanta,
Okay.
but my mom and my mom's entire side of the family, we are like multi-generational Atlanteans. So
Okay.
definitely. So yes, deep roots down there.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because I recently took a trip to Texas. So when I was coming back, I decided I've never been to Atlanta before. So I stopped and stayed a couple days in Atlanta. One, the older section of Atlanta with those homes, absolutely gorgeous. I love the vibes they give off, just kind of that old world, quiet poshness. I just loved all those houses I saw. But more importantly, I went to the Atlanta History Center. I know you've got a whole bunch of museums there, but the Atlanta History Center was amazing. And the cyclorama, the big giant round room with 49-foot walls, painted perspective, all that stuff, that was absolutely amazing. I encourage everybody who's in the area at the Atlanta History Center to go check out the cyclorama. And of course, most people are going, Ray, I have no idea what you're talking about. Have you seen it, or when's the last time you've probably been there, or I'm just curious?
Yes. So I have been there. The last time I was there, I was listening to Don Miller, the author of Masters of the Air, speak. And it was kind of the night that all my entire journey sort of kicked off, actually.
Wow.
I would say that was like 8 years ago.
Right.
And I am speaking there, and I will be speaking there in early March. So if people are in the Atlanta area, I'm going to be there speaking. So with my mom.
That's incredible. That might be another trip that I have to take down, even further down south. I'm in Central Virginia. But for most people who don't know, think of someone in the early 1800s trying to come up with VR technology. Just can't quite make it yet. But what they can do is they can paint with perspective and make things look further away and all this stuff. So just picture a giant round room, walls 49 feet high, with painted scenes, and this one happens to be the Battle of Atlanta, and you literally do feel like you're outside. Your senses are tricked because of the light, because of the painting, the 3D sculptures they have at the bottom. Anyway, cyclorama, check it out. There's only two in this country. One's in for the Gettysburg Battle, and the other one's the city of Atlanta, the Battle of Atlanta. So anyways, I just saw that, and it just made me think of you when I saw your family has those connections to Atlanta. So let's jump into this. Like I said, I'm very excited to have you on the show because I've got your grandfather's book. I read it. It was amazing. And now I find out that his story is going to be a part of a larger story produced by two guys. I don't know if you've ever heard of them before. They're kind of new to this. I think it's Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks. And I'm just like, I am so jealous. That is amazing. I can only imagine what you and your family's reaction was to hearing that kind of news.
I mean, first of all, I had heard rumblings for years. I mean, we are going back over a decade, you guys, or should I say y'all. And we knew that Don Miller's book was optioned by Tom Hanks's production company, Playtone, by Spielberg's production company, Amblin. But that was kind of it. Nobody knew where it was going to be. We thought it was going to be HBO. Meanwhile, now it's Apple, which is amazing. And I never could have imagined that my grandfather would be portrayed. I mean, look, he's not the star of this thing. I'm just thrilled that he's a part of it. He is a supporting character, and it's just wild. I wish that my grandfather was here. I mean, I literally went to the set. And may I say, it's not just a set. They are massive sets in the English countryside. I went at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic with a bunch of my Southern family in tow, like snapping pictures like a bunch of tourists. And these sets were so big that they were over an hour apart from each other. So I could only go to 2 of the many sets because they were just so far away from each other.
That's incredible because probably a year ago, I had the producer of Midway on here. And I'm like, if you ever make another film, just call me. I'll carry your bags. I'll drive your car or whatever. I mean, I can only imagine what it was probably to a degree like being submerged back into that earlier period of history because they try so hard to make it look authentic.
I mean, down to the snow on the ground that were like these little bits of paper, and it looked so real. And this was in front of the prison camps that they had recreated, which, mind you, I walked through the barracks of these of the prison camps of Stalag Luft 3. And it was unbelievable. The attention to detail of like the matches and the cigarette butts in there and what they had on the walls and the typewriters and everything. It was so surreal. I mean, you literally talk about being transported in time. And these people are so talented. I mean, like it's the best of the business that has gone into making Masters of the Air. I am so excited for everybody to see it on TV this fall. We're getting closer, you guys. We're getting closer.
Oh, no, that's exciting. I imagine you probably took a couple thousand photos. Just go ahead and send those to me right now. That'll be fine.
Yes. Just don't tell Apple. Yeah.
Exactly. No, but I can't help but imagine it's books like your grandfather's because he had so much detail about what his life was like, what it was like in the prison camp. And we're going to get all to that probably helped them recreate this very detailed world. And so, again, that's just one of the many reasons people like your grandfather's books, we need those stories. So if I could get you to, let's go ahead and jump into this. If I could get you to introduce your grandfather to us, what was he like? Was he the average kid before the war? What's going on with his world before Pearl Harbor?
So my grandfather, Frank Murphy, grew up in a very, upper middle class family, right in the center of Atlanta, close to Emory University, where he ended up going to college. He was the youngest of 3 boys, so he was the baby, and he just had the most mild-mannered disposition. Never raised his voice, easygoing, happy person. And he was very smart, a great writer, really good at sports. He was the captain of the football team. He was good at music. I know he's almost like the kind of guy you're like, oh, you're good at everything, right? And you're nice and you're cute. Like, come on, what's wrong with you? So
give me one flaw. Just one.
No, I'm just joking. I can't, honestly, I know it sounds silly to say this, but I'm telling you, I could name flaws about many of my family members and myself, but up until his death, I never could find something wrong with him. And I know that sounds cheesy, but that's the reason why I'm doing this and why I'm trying to promote his book that he worked for so many years on, because he was such a good guy. And, he enlisted because he had this love of our country. I mean, this was back at a time where talk about just pride, and he writes about that in the book, where he spent his childhood with his grandfather, taking him over to visit with the Confederate soldiers that were still alive in the Atlanta area. And, maybe in a way it was all romanticized war, but just a great guy, good at school, never a problem child, just an easygoing person.
No, that's great. And I want the listeners to, I'm glad you said that because I want the listeners to remember soft-spoken, Southern gentleman, mild-mannered. Because at the end, after he goes through hell and back, he's going to have some jokes about that where he gets a little off color. And I think he said in the book, that was the only time he ever used that kind of language. But we'll get to that. So the war comes to America. And now, he's going to be like a lot of people. He's going to want to, defend his country. Was there something that happens before the war that had him interested in aviation, or was that just the direction or how he wanted to contribute to the war effort?
I mean, look, he always loved airplanes, and he writes in the book, about, when he was growing up and, seeing at different moments in time, going down to airfields and having family members of his introduce him to aviation in that way. And he was at home at dinner when his father heard on the radio about the Pearl Harbor attacks, and he knew that he would soon get into the war, before the draft had really been reinstated. And, he always knew that he wanted to fight for his country one day if he had to. He wanted to go into the Air Force. And he had flown Piper Cubs solo at flight instruction school in Atlanta, and he knew he wanted to be a pilot, So he decided 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor to join to ensure his ability to get the job that he wanted. And so that he very much wanted to be a pilot, and his eyesight. Okay. Oh, you know what? Maybe that's the flaw, right? He didn't have great eyesight.
That's the one thing you found. No,
that's it. Actually, that's it.
I just read that book. He was going for his physical exam. They're having to turn people away, so they're really trying to get these people in. And I think he wasn't colorblind. He had 20/20 vision, but I think it was depth perception or something along those lines. They said, you're going to have to, we need you, but just know that that's a thing. And I remember in the book, he said something like, I was so crestfallen when they told me that I was afraid they were going to kick me out. The look on his face, he thinks alone, had the doctor go, you know what, that's fine. Let him through, and America needed pilots and they needed crews. So I when you reminded me of that, it brought back that part of the book. And I love it. Yes. I wanted to let I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to let the listeners know, for those of you who are into planes, this book, because he goes through the training, because he's has experience with a lot of different types of aircraft, he goes into great detail. So I think you'll enjoy that very much. So war comes, he enlists, he goes into his training. Now we're going to skip a whole bunch of that because I really do want to say that for the listeners. And trust me, listeners, this book is just over 350 pages. There's a lot of meat to this book, but we're going to skip over that. So he gets to England. He's got his crew. They've been trained up. Can you give us an idea of some of the men that flew with your grandfather, and either the official or unofficial name of their plane was the Bastard's Bungalow, which I thought was great. I tried to name my car that, but my kids wouldn't let me. But anyway.
Love it.
If you could talk to them for me. But who were some of the gentlemen that he is going to end up flying with?
Yeah. So look, my grandfather, becomes a navigator. There was this need for navigators. And then, we fast forward and he's assigned to the 418th Bomb Squadron, and his group, that Bastard's Bungalow, it's called Bastard's Bungalow because they were a bunch of bastards who never knew where they were going next. And that's why they called it that. I love the names of these aircraft that I've gotten to know over the years. And so here are some of the guys. So pilot was Charlie Cruikshank from Massachusetts. You had a co-pilot, Chuck Mertz from Omaha, Nebraska. You're going to see a theme here, guys from all over the country. Bombardier, August Gaspar, but they called him Augie, a friend of my grandfather's his whole life from California. The ball turret gunner, Robert Bixler from Bisbee, Arizona. You had the top turret gunner, Leonard Weeks from West Virginia, radio operator, Orlando from Pennsylvania. I mean, the list goes on. And he flew with this crew for almost a year. And once together, they were transferred to Utah for training as a squadron and a group. And they worked on this, for 4 to 5 months, flying in practicing gunnery, bombing, formation, flying. And I mean, it's just crazy to think that these young guys, they're kids.
They are.
It's just a few months of training, and meanwhile, my grandfather goes through a very truncated training to be a navigator because there was a desperate need for them. And so, you're just thrown into this thing. I mean, you guys, there's no GPS. My grandfather was the GPS, which going back to his mild-mannered temper, thank goodness he was such a calm, even-keeled kind of a person, because you need to be that kind of a person to be the navigator, to be able to keep your calm, keep your cool. And then, anyway, they ended up, switching planes and all that kind of stuff. But their first mission was June 1943. And they were based out of Thorpe Abbotts in England. I've been there. I've been to that Air Force base. It was unbelievable. It's a
Right.
museum today, by the way. You can actually go visit it.
Oh, cool. I started to say I'm jealous, but now that it's a museum, I'm on my way there. Yeah, that would be awesome.
It's really, really, really cool.
So the one part, again, you said something that triggered a memory when I was reading your grandfather's part where he's talking about his training, all of the things they have to learn to be a navigator. I mean, this went on for a couple of pages and I'm like, nope, I'm out because you would not want me. We would end up in the exact opposite direction of where you wanted to go if I was navigator. So again, someone like him with that cool calmness is exactly what they needed. So they're going on their flights. But of course, a lot of people who are listening to this will know that the bombers at first are going to go through a tough time. The Allied, the British, the Canadian, the Americans, and everyone else, bomber crews are going to have a hard time because no fighters have the range yet to protect them. So they pretty much have to go over there by themselves. And there's a lot of casualties early on until something can change with this formula.
100%. I mean, first of all, when you listen to my grandmother, who's 93 years old now, 93 years young,
right.
And her name's Anne. And they were married for 50 years, right? Love of his life. And, she, to this day, she calls them suicide missions, and she is still not happy with the government for those daylight bombing raids, which, we were bombing at night and then we switched to try to hit the target more accurately. And I think that that's really up for debate. A lot of people say that they had to do it to win the war, while others say it didn't really help much. And really put our guys in danger. And there were so many casualties. And it really goes back to the title of my grandfather's book, Luck of the Draw. I mean, it really is luck. The day my grandfather's plane was shot down, don't mean to jump ahead, but 2 men died that day from his crew.
Right.
I mean, that's 2 generations of families, right? That don't even exist. Exactly. I wouldn't even be here today had things gone slightly different. It's wild to me.
Yeah. You know what? Your grandmother is on very solid ground. I think from what I've read, the Americans were a little more impatient than the British. They wanted to jump right into this. No, let's just fly over and start bombing them. You can do that. But as you just pointed out, you're going to pay the price for it. And a lot of these American crews did. I think there was somewhere in the book, like the 100th Bomber Group lost 45 aircraft and their crews in less than 4 months of combat. So it's a bloody time to be over there. Yes, they're trying to do something heroic. They're trying to damage the German war machine, but they are paying the ultimate price for this.
I mean, I have a picture in my office at home, and it makes me so emotional. It's my grandfather right after Regensburg, which is one of the deadliest, most intense missions, one of 2 of the craziest, most dramatic missions that my grandfather was part of. And remember, my grandfather flew 20 successful missions before he was shot down on his 21st. Wow. And Regensburg, my grandfather had said that the enemy fighters were more deadly than the flak. And they sustained a full hour of attack that day. And, my grandfather talked about how there was no friendly fighter escorts for the bombers and how scary it was. And that they ended up diverting and going to Northern Africa. And the plane was so badly damaged that they had to land in Northern Africa in Morocco, and they couldn't even fly it back to England. And so they were there for a few days. And I have a picture of my grandfather with this men in Morocco. They were there for 3 or 4 days before going back. And that hangs in my office. And there's a lot of things from the war that are in my office, but it's really unbelievable what they went through. And that's why, look, I can explain it. People can read it, and I want them to read this book. And it's not just for somebody that's interested in World War II. It really is a page turner at many parts. And my grandfather, turns out he's an incredible writer, right? Oh, yes. And he did so much research. I mean, look at the footnotes. This isn't just a diary. This is unbelievable, the research that went into this for 7 years. But I'm so excited for people to see this play out. And I'm so happy Austin Butler is in this, because I think it's going to get a lot of people to watch it and to learn about what these young boys did. Like what Tom Hanks said on the cover of my grandfather's book. Like, how did those young boys do such things?
Right, exactly. But it would take a young person who's full of life, who's full of, I'm going to live forever kind of attitude, because I can only imagine your grandfather going up 20 times and going, you know what, this could be the day. This could be the end of my life right here. But he's got a duty to do. And like with a lot of soldiers, the most important thing are your mates. You want to take care of your friends want to take care of you. So you do this together. But to go up 20 times knowing that could be it is staggering. And you're right, the 21st time his luck runs out, if you will. And I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about that. So he's been there for, I think, somewhere around 4 months. I can't remember exactly. He's going up. I'm sure he has seen a lot. But then on October 10th, 1943, it's a particular day for him and his plane and his crewmates.
Yeah. So from October 4th to October 10th was Black Week. And it ended on October 10th, the day that my grandfather was shot down. So there were 13 bombers sent up this day. And I want you guys to listen to this. 12 were shot down. The only plane to return was Rosie Rosenthal's, who was the pilot of the only airplane that returned to England the day that my grandfather's plane was shot down. And guess who's one of my best friends today?
Oh, my goodness.
His son, Dan Rosenthal.
That's incredible. What are the odds? That's incredible.
What are the odds? I met him through going to these 100th Bomb Group reunions that I've been going to for years, long before I ever thought I would ever take part in this mission of my own to put my grandfather's book out there like this. And to, it was pretty much self-published. It was done with a man who had a publishing company, and my grandfather wrote the book. He wrote it for the family. And it was like his version of self-publishing, putting the book out, not many copies. And, I think in his heart, maybe he always wondered what it would have been like to partner with a big publisher and really put this book out there, but he didn't know how to do that. And that really wasn't the point of it. So to be able to now do this, and through going to these reunion groups over the years, I've become friends with a lot of great guys. And Dan, who was the president until recently of the 100th Bomb Group Foundation, which is where half the proceeds from the books that are being sold go to that and the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah. Anyway, I'm really good friends with Dan. So what are the odds that, it's just so cool. So many full circle moments, right? Yes. And I've got to meet so many cool people. And Rosie is going to be portrayed in the series. So it's really been a neat experience for all of us and all these families to get to know each other. I've gotten to know a lot of these families. It's really neat.
That's cool. And I just have to say real quick before you go on, you mentioned that one, the actor. My daughter has heard that he was going to be in it, and they're like, "Daddy, can we come with you to the movie theater or watch it on the TV?" I'm like, yes, you can, because I know you're just going to be looking at him, but that's fine. You're still going to learn something, and that makes me happy.
It's going to bring a lot of people to it. I mean, look, he did so well in Elvis. He might win an Oscar in March.
Right.
I think it's going to only make things so much better. But yeah, so my grandfather, he first time using a parachute. He was firing a machine gun in the nose of the airplane when a cannon shell went off behind him, and he got shrapnel in his shoulder. He still had it to the day he died. Would always set off alarms at the airport. Went on to get the Purple Heart, right, and the Air Medal. Prisoner of War medal. And then he jumped out of the airplane. It took him about 20 minutes to hit the ground. He checked his watch. And then he landed in a German farmer's field. Fast forward decades later, he goes back to that farm and becomes friends with the people whose farmhouse backyard he landed in. That's amazing. In the book too. That's amazing. Two women, brought him some water, cleaned him up, but they had to turn him over to the local police. And he was just happy to be alive. Now, they were yelling at my grandfather. They didn't physically abuse him, but they did. He had a sprained ankle and other issues, and then they ended up, taking him away, and he was a prisoner of war for the next 18 months. His family didn't know what had happened to him. They didn't know if he was dead or alive. They knew he was missing in action. And his father, my grandmother loves to say, his dad called the White House every day, telling the leaving messages for the president. I guess back then you could do that. And so he was calling, and they have finally located my grandfather and let them know that, he was a prisoner of war in Stalag Luft 3.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, so there's an amount of time where they don't know his fate. They, being human, they probably can't help but assume the worst. And then to get that news is so mixed. Yes, he's alive, but he's also a prisoner of war. And, I imagine their imaginations would run amok afresh, just knowing that he's under the tender mercies of the Nazis.
I mean, it's so interesting because in the first part of his time as a prisoner of war, he was in the South Compound of Stalag Luft III. It had just opened. He writes in the book about how he was surprised at how new it all was. It was austere but adequate, but it was overcrowded. He lost some weight that first year. They were receiving packages from the Red Cross. He joined the band. Remember, he loved music. He writes about how music saved his life. But they weren't ever getting enough clothing. They weren't getting new clothes. They were never getting really enough rations. And, they were never given enough coal. They were always cold. And so, it was a really tough time. And like I said, he passed time by playing in the POW band in the camp. So he played the clarinet and the saxophone at Emory University, and he did the same at camp. And then they built their own theater in there. They had a glee club. They would perform concerts and plays there. I mean, you might not think that this is really happening, but this really is happening. So, and then he also writes in there, which I think is really interesting, not to give too much away. He writes about how there were electricians and engineers and architects, right? I mean, these are smart guys alongside him, and they start digging tunnels because they're trying to maybe get out of there. But then he was in the same prison camp as the Great Escape that took place. We all know how that ended. So thank God they never tunneled out.
Exactly. Yeah. When I got to that part of the book, I was like, okay, so the conditions aren't great, but they're bearable. But like you said, I mean, they're cold. They're not getting enough food. He's losing weight, which adds to fatigue and chills and things like that. But the Germans were smart enough to know, hey, we have to give them something to focus on, or they might cause trouble for us. You combine that with the Red Cross, and there's going to be musical instruments. There's going to be various ways for them to try to distract themselves from the hell that they're going through. And all the while, Germany is still being bombed night and day at this point. So he's having a hard time, but he does find a way to have something else to focus on. And yet it's not over with. In fact, it's about to get a lot worse because they're going to be moved from this camp to another. And that is a story in and of itself. Could you share some of that with us, please?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know why you just made me want to cry. That's never happened before. Okay.
I cried when I read this part of the book, so it's only fair. No, I'm just joking. But no, it wasn't. It was that visceral. It was that intense when I got to that part of the book.
The winter of 1944, and conditions were slowly worsening. And it was January 27th, 1945. So, it was the winter of 44, but now it's like early 1945. And they were forced to evacuate the advancing Russian armies. And they were given an hour to prepare. They were grabbed their things frantically. My grandfather carried only the things that he could carry, keep him warm. And they started out marching in the snow, and they were only given a few minutes of rest every hour. And they would march all night until 5 a.m. They were given an hour's break. They were kept outside, and people started dropping off. And he writes about how people were giving up and they just wanted to die, and how they would beg with each other not to give up and carry each other. I mean, there are some photos from this, and it was just it was unbelievable. They were actually locked and put into boxcars that were designed to hold 40 men at one point, and they had about 70 men in them. And they were put in these boxcars for the next 2 days and 3 nights, where they ended up at Moosburg, and that was a new prison camp called Stalag 7A. And the conditions there were deplorable. And if you compared it to what he had been in, it looked like a country club, the prison camp that he had been in. So if you can imagine that. A fun fact, if you guys go on my Instagram or you want to follow me on social, I also wrote about it for USA Today. I have one of the shoes that my grandfather wore on this march in the snow. He traded his leather soles with another soldier who had these like wooden clogs. And maybe because leather is a commodity, maybe they could trade it. But my grandfather traded his wet soles, got these wooden clogs. They look like boats. I don't know how you could wear them. I have one of them. I still have it. And so it's the one thing that I've like refused to give to any museum.
Right.
It's like a small piece of him. Everything else, everybody can see either in Thorpe Abbott's of things he gave, or the museum in Savannah.
Right. Did I read somewhere that your grandmother jokingly said she used it as a planner in one of the homes?
Oh, yeah. I know, which goes to show you like how crazy this all is, right? Like I take all of this so seriously, but Grandpa came back from the war. He never talked about it. He had 4 kids. He had a wife. My grandmother telling me just the other week that she didn't even know Grandpa had been a prisoner of war. It was his parents that told her. Right. He didn't talk about it. I don't know if that's some post-traumatic stress. I'll never know because I wasn't talking about those things as a teenager and a 20-something-year-old with my grandfather. I was interested in the war, but those weren't the things that we were talking about. Right. And so I'm writing about that actually for CNN about post-traumatic stress and maybe what that looked like for the greatest generation. And yeah, no, I mean, my mom and her siblings growing up, they didn't really know much of anything about it. Yeah. So one of those shoes was used as a planter and no one knows what happened to the other one. So there we go. as long as you've got one, that you're fine. I've done a lot of interviews over the years and I get a lot of the same story. People will be like, yeah, he came home, he never talked about it. And then maybe either a friend calls or something happens that just, it hits a switch or it starts them thinking about it. And suddenly this stuff starts coming out. I did want to ask you, so I guess it was later in life that he decided to write his book, or has it been around for a while and it's just being republished now? I'm not sure of the timeline. Yes. So my grandfather, after he retired, but well after he retired, my grandfather started writing the book in his mid-70s, maybe early 70s, but like mid-70s. And so this was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And he published the book in 2001, and then he died about 4 or 5 years later. Right. So it's been 20 years since the book first came out. But again, because of the way he published it, he self-published it essentially with this friend of his from the 8th Air Force, somebody he met later in life. He didn't know this man during the war, and he was a publisher, and he published food and nutrition books. And so he's like, well, I can print these up for you and do this with you. And they did a small run, and he spoke at he spoke at the 100th Bomb Group reunions and things like that, but it was meant to be for his family and his grandchildren, his 7 grandkids and their families, and to, immortalize it, memorialize it. So then, fast forward for me, I'm on the board of directors for the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum. I'm going to these reunions. I got to know Don Miller, and then I'm getting to meet, the people from Playtone and Amblin and at these reunions. And I'm starting to say to myself, gosh, I wish that if somebody wants to read the book that they can, because they can't. It's out of print. Like how do I do that? Well, there you go. How do you do that? Well, I can tell you, it took years to do it, and it was not easy. And this book was written on a typewriter. We had to literally get this digitized. I had to go find every photo that he had in the book. I mean, it's been a scavenger hunt. It's not easy, but I'm really excited. And I think he would be so proud that this is happening. And Tom Hanks having a quote on the cover, he'd faint. He would faint.
Yeah, it could not get any better. So I'm glad you told us that, because that's a real, it just makes you feel better. And if I had to say, I think more people are going to read it this time than the first time it was published. I think he's going to be happy. But another happy day for him was April 29th, 1945. He's in the camp and something big happens. Can you kind of share that part of his life with us, please?
Yes, I will. And I just want to say that during this time, though, it was a really difficult time for him. This was an overcrowded prison camp designed to hold 12,000. There've been different calculations, but over 100,000 prisoners were there. There's German bread. There's no good food. There's no more Red Cross parcels. There's no more band. The beds and everything are infested with fleas, bed bugs, lice. When they were liberated, which is what you're talking about, he had pneumonia. He was like skin and bones. And it was a terribly emotionally difficult time for him. And so the 14th Armored Division came into the vicinity of Moosburg on the night of April 28th that you're talking about. And, the senior British and American officers, together with the Red Cross and the commandant of the prison camp, they went out and they met the Allies under a truce flag. And the Germans, they wanted to negotiate the surrender of the camp, but the American forces nearby demanded, the unconditional surrender of the camp by 9 a.m. the following morning on April 29th. And so the German area commander refused. And the next day, the Americans did begin to attack. And then the POWs listened, all of a sudden, it dawned on them what was going on. And there was this gun battle nearby. And it was unbelievable. My grandfather, he's not exactly sure what's going on. But then after a day or two, an American Army unit showed up with some food, and then Patton came and he crashes down, in his tank, and he crashes down the gates. General Patton, with his famous revolvers, and it's like, again, it's something out of a movie. How amazing is this? And General Patton came up to different POWs that day, and he came up to my grandfather. A group of men were standing there, and he looked at how terrible they looked, and he said, "I'm going to kill these sons of bitches for this." Right. And my grandfather used to tell that story, and he never cursed. Isn't that crazy? It's so wild. And these stories are, it's just, it's crazy that this was real life, because my grandfather ends up going back and, going back to Emory and kind of pocketing this away in his mind and in his memories. And then he goes on to finish school and eventually meets my grandmother. And then he goes back to school and becomes a lawyer, right? And then he has this whole other life where he actually continues to work with planes for the rest of his life, working for Lockheed, Georgia, which is, Lockheed Martin now. And so he, you would never know that my grandfather had this crazy experience in his early 20s,
Yeah. It's like something crazy and life-changing happens to you at a really young age, and then it's over with, and then somehow you have to find a way to live the rest of your life, even though you experienced this thing that had amazing highs and low lows. So like a lot of people, he's got to readjust when he gets back. It sounds like he did a pretty good job. He was focused on, trying to better himself, get a degree, start a family. So it sounds like he made that transition. But like you hinted at in other views, and like he wrote in his book, there were memories and there were his friends that he had remembered, because like you said, I think at least 2 of them died the day his plane went down. So this is an incredible story, and like I said, it's over 350 pages. The details are amazing. And Chloe, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this, and I'm glad your grandfather's book is out in print, because it was a joy to read. And I'm going to let you have the last word, but again, that one line that he says, I think near the end of it, when he said something about he's walking with ghosts for the rest of his life. Can you give us an idea of what you think he meant by that?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, he wrote the book not just to tell his story to his kids and his grandkids, and he did it for them. He wanted to honor his fellow servicemen, and that's why he wrote this book. And I think that it goes back to the title, that I think there's some survivor's guilt, right? Like you fought for your country, but you're looking back with pride, but you're walking with these ghosts of these men that didn't make it. Why me? Why do I get to live and others don't? And I think that that's what it's all about. We all have a lot of crap going on in our lives, right? Yeah. But I think that a book like this puts things into perspective. And you choose your heart. And these men, so many of them persevered, and they went up every single day, whether it's because they were naive or just because they were young, but they fought for us every single day. And these were some really tough circumstances. So I think that when you read this, we've all been through a hell of a lot with the pandemic. We all have a lot of things going on in our lives. But if you read this book, I think it's going to make you feel pride for your country. We need that right now. And maybe help you find some resilience inside yourself. I think that's what it's all about. This book is for everybody. It's not a quick read, but this book really is for everybody,
Oh yeah, no, it's like if I'm kind of tongue in cheek here, but if it's like someone along the lines of Forrest Gump sat down and wrote this guy had so many different phases to his life. Your grandfather, he's just an innocent kid, and then he's training, and then he's in war, and then he's a prisoner of war, and then he gets out of the war, and then he's a family man and a lawyer. And he just had so many different stages of his life. But you're absolutely right. People just need to persevere and move on and ask yourself, what's next? And it sounds like Mr. Murphy said a lot to himself. Okay, what's next? So again, and I just want to let you know that I've already purchased the audiobook. I am so looking forward to hearing that as I walk the dog. I've read the book.
It's narrated by Jonas Moore. That was my idea. I will take that. And Jonas Moore is the actor who plays my grandfather in Masters of the Air, a British actor who does a great Southern accent. And yeah, so I think that, look, this is a great way to kind of get your feet wet before Masters of the Air comes out. So I think that this is a great introduction for people. And then for others, it's a deep dive into one of the characters.
Right. And a good point. And like I said, there's tons for the pure historians out there. This has got tons of detail for everyone else. This is just a good read. Like you said, it's a page turner. It's got a little bit of everything in there. I burned through this book like in 3 days. So it was that good. So for all my listeners out there, it's Luck of the Draw, My Story of the Air War in Europe by Frank Murphy. Check it out. It's going to be great. I can't wait to see the series. I can't wait to hear the audiobook as well, especially with him doing the reading. Chloe, thank you very much for your time today and for sharing with us your experiences about this book.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate it, Ray.